Hi, my name's Lunith. On my very first day, my sister threw hot coffee in my face and told me, loud enough for the whole office to hear, "You don't belong here." They laughed, every single one of them, but none of them knew. I was the new CEO, and when I walked to the front of that room, she didn't just freeze, she shattered. But how did we get there? What kind of family trains you to expect cruelty, then punishes you for staying silent? You ever been humiliated by your own blood in front of strangers? If so, stay with me. Because this story isn't just about revenge, it's about the silence that finally breaks. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below. I want to know who's out there, listening in the dark. It was barely 8:10 on a Monday morning when I walked through the glass doors of the building I used to clean as a teenager. Back then, I'd scrubbed the floors with cheap lemon cleaner while Valora strutted past in her pencil skirts, talking loud enough for everyone to hear words like campaigns, budget, and C-level strategy. She always made sure I knew I wasn't one of them. Now I was back. No security badge, no announcement, no fanfare, just a plain gray cardigan over a navy top, black slacks, and shoes I could run in. I carried one worn leather tote and kept my hair pulled low out of my face. The receptionist gave me a half smile as I passed. No one recognized me. That was the point. I paused by the break room. The smell of burnt espresso and something microwaved lingered in the air. A young man in a button-up shirt was joking with two interns near the fridge. "New hires show up in business casual now?" He laughed. "I miss the old dress code days." "Maybe she's here to clean," one of the girls whispered, loud enough for me to hear. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Then I heard her. "Valora. You've got to be kidding me." I turned toward the voice. She stood in the break room doorway, red lipsticked smile twitching as she stared me up and down. Her heels clicked across the tile like she owned it, like nothing in the world could touch her. "Did HR really approve this?" she asked no one in particular. "You look underqualified." She glanced around at the others. "Sorry, sweetheart," she said to me, her voice thick with condescension. "This isn't a volunteer program." I didn't respond. I reached for a cup from the counter. That was my mistake. Valora took a step closer. "Let me help you with that." She accidentally bumped into me hard, and her coffee spilled down the front of my shirt. The room froze. Then came the laughter. A couple of them tried to hide it. One didn't bother and pulled out his phone. Valora grinned. "Oops," she said. "Maybe next time don't reach for the last cup, hun. We do seniority here." I looked down at the dark stain blooming across my top. My hands didn't shake. I just reached into my tote, pulled out a small handkerchief, and blotted at the fabric. Mom gave it to me when I left home at 19, said it was stitched from her wedding veil. Back then, Valora had stood on the front porch and hissed, "You'll never make it without us." Now here we were. At 9 sharp, I stepped into the executive conference room. The walls were lined with backlit panels and abstract art I'd quietly funded. Valora was already there, holding court near the whiteboard with a dry erase marker in hand. When she saw me enter, she rolled her eyes. Someone is definitely lost. Before I could speak, the room fell silent. The CFO, Mr. Adair, entered from the far door. "Good morning, everyone," he said crisply. Then he turned and nodded to me. "Ms. Thorne? Glad you made it." Valora blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" Mr. Adair cleared his throat. "Everyone, please welcome Ms. Lunith Thorne, effective this morning. She is your new CEO." The words hung there like thunder. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a pen. Valora's mouth opened, then shut, then opened again. "No, this has to be—" I stepped forward, slow, calm. I could hear my own heartbeat, not from nerves, just from how loud the silence was. I turned, faced the room, and spoke clearly. "As of this morning, I am your new CEO." A man in a navy suit actually choked on his water. "Valora?" She stood frozen, her face drained of all that color, and for the first time in years I felt taller than her. Nobody moved. For a moment the air in the boardroom held still, like it forgot how to breathe. I stayed where I was, standing just behind the head chair. I didn't need to sit, not yet. I wanted them to see me, all of me. Mr. Adair adjusted his tie and took a step back, leaving the floor to me. Eyes flicked between him and me, then landed back on Valora, whose mouth was still slightly ajar, like she'd tasted something bitter and couldn't spit it out. She blinked rapidly. "Wait, you're the Luneth Thorn?" I gave a polite nod. "Yes, that would be me." Her forced smile cracked as she tilted her head slightly. "You didn't exactly announce yourself." "I didn't think I needed to." My voice was even, but I didn't smile. I figured a resume should speak louder than a name. Some of the managers shifted in their seats. I could feel the tension crawling along the floor like spilled water. One woman near the end of the table looked genuinely nervous. A younger man fumbled with the cap of his pen. I finally pulled out my chair and sat. Let them settle with the new image, the same woman they laughed at an hour ago now commanding the room. My name wasn't on my blouse, but it was already on the building's incoming signage. That was enough. "I'll be brief," I began. "I've spent the last 11 years overseeing company restructures, turnarounds, and transitions across 3 states. What I learned, again and again, is this: the culture inside a company is either what builds your business or what silently rots it from the inside." A few heads nodded, but most eyes were still watching Valora. "I know transitions bring uncertainty," I continued, "but what I won't allow is disrespect. Toward clients, toward staff, and especially toward each other. I don't need names. I don't need whispers. I need change, and I expect it to start now." Valora sat completely still, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't blink, not once. The tension broke only when Mr. Adair cleared his throat. "Unless there are any questions, we'll leave Ms. Thorne to continue her onboarding with the executive team this afternoon." Chairs shuffled. People stood, slowly, unsure if they should clap, speak, or simply vanish. No one made eye contact on the way out. I stayed seated, pretending to skim the agenda handouts left on the table. But I felt every strained breath in that room. It was the kind of silence that people don't forget. When I finally stood to leave, the head of HR, Marissa, slipped up beside me, her voice low. "Ms. Thorne, do you have a minute?" We stepped into the hallway outside the boardroom. The corridor was quiet, lined with framed photos from old company events. Valora was in most of them. Marissa pulled out a small tablet and tapped it once. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this so soon," she said, "but this came through from security just now." She turned the screen to me. There I was, in the break room, and there was Valora, stepping into me, hot coffee in hand. The liquid hit me squarely. The laughter echoed faintly from the audio pickup. I didn't say a word, just watched. "She's done things like this before," Marissa said softly. "Passive-aggressive power moves, especially toward new hires she doesn't recognize or doesn't like the look of." "Has anyone filed complaints?" I asked, still watching the footage. "One, but it never escalated. They left within the year." I nodded slowly. "Log it. Add it to her record. But don't act on it yet." Marissa raised an eyebrow. "Understood." Back in my office, new but still echoing with someone else's scent, I changed out of the coffee-stained blouse. I'd brought a backup, old habits. You learn to anticipate messes when you've spent your life cleaning up other people's. By noon, the cafeteria buzzed like nothing had happened. People ate their salads and microwave meals under dull fluorescent lights. I entered with a tray and scanned for a table. Most of them looked away. That was fine. I chose a corner seat. It didn't take long. Valora strutted over with a tray and a bright saccharine smile. She sat down like she owned the bench. "Well, this has been quite the morning," she said, her voice laced with sugar and acid. "I mean, wow. CEO? Why didn't you tell me you were applying?" I chewed quietly and took a sip of water before answering. I wasn't applying. I was recruited. She laughed, too loudly. Oh, of course. Executive headhunting. I hear it's all the rage these days. I met her eyes and smiled gently. Thanks, Valora. Let's catch up. Soon. She blinked, sensing something shift under the surface but not quite able to name it. She didn't realize that moment would be her last upper hand. I watched Valora walk away from me, that artificial grin still frozen on her face. She had no idea that moment would be the last time she held even a sliver of the upper hand. And maybe deep down, she sensed it. Maybe that's why she clung to her smile like it was armor. Later that night, I sat alone in the office that used to be our father's. My nameplate was already etched on the door. The room smelled faintly of old leather and ambition. I didn't touch a thing. Not yet. I needed a moment before I made it mine. I leaned back in the chair and let my eyes drift shut. It had been 6 months ago when the board first reached out to me. I was wrapping up a consulting contract in Portland, thinking I'd finally built a quiet life, far from the family, far from the games. Then came the message. Discretion required. Opportunity confidential. High-level leadership transition. I almost didn't reply. I almost deleted it. But the name at the bottom caught my eye. Mr. Trellis. He had worked with my father in the early years, a man who used to pat my head and hand me butterscotch candies when I visited Dad at work. Trellis didn't traffic in flattery. If he was calling me, it wasn't a formality. We're looking for someone resilient, he'd said over coffee in a quiet booth. Someone strategic, and someone who won't crumble when the family pressure starts. I remember raising my brow. So you're not asking me to apply, you're warning me. He smiled faintly. We've already decided. You just have to say yes. Valora hadn't known. She was too busy playing empress in middle management, too confident in the assumption that our father would never step aside without crowning her. But even he had seen what she'd become. Surface charm, backroom manipulation, no strategic growth, just control for control's sake. Still, none of this should have surprised me. Growing up, Valora always managed to twist the story. If she broke something, I got blamed. If I won an award, she suddenly helped me get there. Every family gathering turned into a theater of Valora's latest triumph, and somehow I was always seated at the kids' table, even when I was 30. One memory stuck like splintered glass. Her wedding. I'd flown in from a conference on red-eye just to be there. I barely had time to change clothes before being handed a tray. A tray. Can you pass the champagne, Lunith? Her mother-in-law chirped. You know your way around service, right? And while I circled the room with flutes, Valora stood center stage as the officiant introduced her not just as the bride, but as a rising star in her father's empire. I was never introduced at all. I shook that thought off and opened my laptop. If I let my memories set the tone for this job, I'd drown. Instead, I started going through the company's internal files. It was quiet, almost too quiet for a corporate system. A few folders had odd names, ones I didn't recognize from past audits. One labeled Operational Equity Adjustments caught my eye. That was a sanitized phrase if I ever saw one. I opened it. Quarterly bonuses, but not the standard ones. Hidden under layers of internal routing and flagged discretionary, there were payments, tens of thousands of dollars, channeled to Valora and 3 other managers. Not illegal, but definitely unethical, and definitely not disclosed to the board. It had been quietly added 6 months ago, right after my father's health began to decline. I scrolled. No alerts from HR, no internal flags from finance. That meant either they missed it, or they were too afraid to question her. I closed the laptop slowly, resting my hands on the lid like it might bite. This wasn't just about ego. It was about how far she'd let rot seep into a company that had once been built on grit and integrity. The next morning, I asked the head of HR, Mara, to step into my office. She came in carefully, eyes guarded. I didn't mention the bonuses. Instead, I asked, "How long have you been with the company?" She blinked, then smiled faintly. 12 years. Good. So, you know the culture. She nodded. I do. Then let me ask you something. If someone saw something unethical, Something that might not technically break the rules but certainly violates the spirit of this place, what would they do? Her silence was answer enough. I let her leave with a polite thank you. No confrontation yet. I needed more. That night, I stayed late again. I wanted quiet. I wanted no one hovering. It was well past 9 when I heard a voice down the hallway. Valora's. Soft, clipped, impatient. On a call. I don't know what she's doing here. She was never supposed to come back. I didn't move. I just stood in the hallway, half in shadow, letting those words soak into my bones. She was never supposed to come back. Not me. Luneth. That one sentence lit a fuse I didn't even know I'd buried. I didn't slam doors. I didn't pace the hallway or scream into my pillow like I might have done years ago. No. I just sat at my desk with the office light still dim, breathing through my nose, steady and slow, like I used to when I'd prep depositions no one expected me to win. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I reviewed every file Valora had access to in the past quarter. Not because I needed evidence, I already knew what kind of woman she was, but because I wanted precision. If she was foolish enough to think I wouldn't dig into the details, she was about to learn how wrong she'd been. By 7 the next morning, I'd sent an encrypted summary to the board chair. Just a heads up. You may want to review Attachment C, quietly. Nothing more. I didn't need to overplay the hand. Not yet. The real move? That came 48 hours later. I walked into the East Conference Room just before 9, where the quarterly board meeting was scheduled. The glass walls hummed with pre-meeting chatter, jokes between finance leads, interns scurrying with coffee, Valora's voice floating above it all like she owned the air. She hadn't seen the memo. Good. I nodded to Marion, one of the senior HR partners, as she approached me outside the door. Should we prepare a formal note addressing the reception you received? She asked, eyes kind but calculating. I shook my head. Let them write their own apology, with their faces. Marion smirked just a little. Understood. The assistant still looked through me like I was an intern. One even asked if I'd brought extra handouts for Miss Valora's speech. I didn't correct her. I just thanked her and walked in. Valora was already at the head of the table, legs crossed, glossy heels tapping a rhythm on the floor, coffee in hand like it had been poured for her by fate. She was telling a story about a Vegas conference from 3 years ago, something about stealing the mic during a karaoke contest. The room was eating it up. Even some of the senior managers were chuckling. And me? I took a seat halfway down the table. Quietly. No fuss. I didn't need to perform. That was her game. The chairperson entered 5 minutes later. Her arrival shifted the air. People straightened up, laughter quieted, Valora's voice dropped an octave. Morning, everyone, Chairwoman Elson said, placing her folder on the table. We'll keep this brief, but before we dive into reports, there's a staffing update the board would like to announce. I didn't move. Valora's smile froze, just for a second. She looked toward me, then back at the chair. One of the senior VPs actually leaned forward, as if his body sensed something his mind hadn't yet processed. Effective immediately, Elson continued. Luneth Arman will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer of Arman and Associates. The silence fell like a dropped tray in a cathedral. No one applauded. No one knew what to do. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Valora blinked, just once, and then, very slowly, turned toward me. Her mouth didn't move, but her fingers clutched her coffee cup tighter, the same hands that used to yank dolls from mine when we were kids, that once pushed me into the rose bushes behind our old church on a Sunday afternoon because I wore the wrong shoes. I stood. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I looked across the room at every department lead, every director, every intern who'd watched me walk through the door last week like I didn't belong. I look forward to working with each of you, I said. I'm confident this company's future will be one we build together, with integrity. And then, finally, I turned to her. Valora sat stone-faced, lips thin, trying to hold composure like it was some kind of high-stakes negotiation. You'll report directly to me, I said, voice steady. Effective immediately. There it was, the tremor behind her eyes. She didn't blink again, but I could see the panic setting in. Not because I was cruel, but because I wasn't. Because I hadn't screamed. I hadn't thrown the past in her face or barked back at her barbs. I'd simply walked in, sat down, and told the truth. Out loud, on paper, with the full weight of the board behind me. That kind of authority. It's the kind Valora never understood, because she never earned it. And deep down, she knew that. I don't know what she's doing here. She was never supposed to come back. That whisper, buried in the back of the room, clung to the walls like smoke. But I didn't look back. I just stood, spine straight, voice steady, and said the words I'd rehearsed only in silence. You'll report directly to me. Effective immediately. Valora didn't flinch. She stood there, chin high, hands relaxed at her sides. But I saw it. A twitch in her fingers. A shift in her eyes, like someone trying to hold their breath underwater just a little too long. The boardroom was quiet. Too quiet. And then the clapping began. Scattered at first. A few hesitant palms. Then louder, polite, performative. The kind of applause people give at a funeral when they don't know what else to do. A couple of department heads gave me tight smiles. One woman in marketing looked like she was about to cry. Maybe she knew what this meant. Maybe she'd just had enough of pretending. But Valora? She didn't clap. She just adjusted her blazer like it was armor and locked eyes with me. No words, no expression. Just that stare, like she could will the walls to fall inward and crush the whole room. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, I stepped up to the podium and spoke. I'm not here to rewrite history. I'm here to learn from it. We will lead this company not with entitlement, but with integrity. No more silos. No more insiders and others. If you're here to work, you belong. Period. No fireworks, no threats, just facts. And somehow I knew that unsettled her more than any dramatic speech could have. The applause ended. People started shuffling out, some muttering things like, "About time," or "Didn't see that coming." I stayed back. Let them leave first. Let the dust settle. Then I walked to my new office. It used to be Dad's. The air still held that faint scent of leather and cologne, the way his presence always did. I paused by the heavy oak desk, the same one I wasn't allowed to sit behind as a teenager, even when I interned here. That seat's not for observers, he once told me. You earn it. Guess what, Dad? I did. The COO, Mr. Frawley, was already waiting. He stood when I entered, and I waved him to sit. I won't waste your time, I said. Give me everything, the good, the bad, and especially the buried. He handed me a thick binder and leaned back, crossing his arms. You sure you're ready for all this? I met his eyes. Were you ready when Valora took over? He didn't answer, just nodded slightly. Inside the binder was a mess, supplier contracts hanging by threads, a marketing campaign in Europe that had blown through $500,000 with no returns. And then Valora's quarterly reports. At first glance, they looked fine. Too fine. I flipped pages slowly. Something didn't sit right. The numbers were just too clean, too consistent. Revenue curves that conveniently dipped and recovered right on schedule. Client lists that hadn't changed in 6 quarters. It didn't add up. Who reviewed these? I asked. Frawley sighed. Her assistant compiled most of them. Valora handled final sign-off herself. I nodded slowly, then closed the binder. She'd cooked the books. Not enough to draw external audit flags, but enough that any experienced eye could see the smoothing. She'd been propping up her vision, new retail expansions, aggressive growth, with fake stability. I sat still for a while after he left. Not angry, not surprised even, just tired. There was a part of me that wanted to march right down and blast the truth in front of the whole board, but I didn't, because even now, after everything, there was still that aching part of me that remembered the girl who used to braid my hair before school, who once punched a boy in the jaw for calling me weird, who whispered in my ear the night Mom died, We're all we have now. I didn't want to burn her to the ground. I wanted her to stand on her own, if she had it in her. That evening, as the building dimmed and most of the staff had gone home, I was still at the office, staring at my laptop, when I heard the door click. Valora walked in like she owned the place. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, voice light. "Nice speech. You rehearsed that in the mirror for years?" I didn't turn. "No, just watched you long enough to know what not to say." That landed harder than I meant it to. She shifted, just a hair. "Dad gave me this place," she said. "You took it from me." I closed the laptop slowly. "He handed you the keys, Valora. You drove it off a cliff." She walked closer, defiant, but I could see the edges starting to crack. Her voice dropped. "You think you know better than me? You think people respect you more just because they smiled today? This company breathes because of me." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled out the envelope I'd sealed earlier and slid it across the desk. "You've got 48 hours. She didn't move. "To come clean," I added, "or I will." The silence between us stretched long. Finally, she picked up the envelope, carefully, like it might explode, and turned to leave. No insults, no parting shots. But her hand trembled as she opened the door, and that told me more than words ever could. Valora didn't slam the door behind her. She didn't raise her voice or fling papers like she had in the past. She just left, quietly. But that silence felt louder than any tantrum she'd ever thrown. And when I looked down at the envelope I'd handed her, now abandoned on the corner of my desk, I noticed the slightest indentation where her fingers had clutched it too tight. The tremble I'd caught in her wrist. It stayed with me longer than I expected. The next morning, the air inside the office felt thick, like everyone was holding their breath but pretending not to. You could hear phones ring down the hall, printers hum behind glass doors, the soft thud of coffee mugs on desks. But the usual chatter? Gone, replaced with something colder, sharper. I walked through the corridor, files tucked under my arm, and noticed eyes dart away the moment I made contact. Whispers trailing just barely behind me. A receptionist offered a nervous smile, and even that looked rehearsed. Valora's office was dark. Her assistant caught me glancing. "She's working remotely," she said, too quickly. "Of course," I nodded. I didn't press. I didn't have to. I spent the rest of the day in meeting after meeting, tightening the seams where she'd left them loose, addressing concerns she had dodged, and with the board, I stayed steady. Calm, direct. I told them we would move forward with integrity and that the era of unchecked ego was behind us. They nodded, most with cautious optimism. But I couldn't ignore the quiet. That night I stayed late, again. Most of the building had emptied out, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. I poured myself a cup of lukewarm tea and stood by the window in my father's old office, now mine. From this view, I could see the top of the fountain where Valora and I used to play when we were kids. I must have been 12 when a group of boys from school cornered me near the bike racks and started jeering about my weight. One of them grabbed my backpack and dumped everything onto the ground. I was frozen, mortified. But Valora, 16, already sharp-tongued and fearless, stepped between us without blinking. "Pick it all up," she'd snapped, "or I'll call your parents myself and tell them what cowards they raised." They picked it up. I never forgot that day, not because she saved me, but because afterward, she didn't gloat. She just handed me my notebooks, straightened my hoodie, and said, "They only bark loud when they feel small." Some part of me, deep down, still clung to that version of her. Maybe that girl was buried under all this bitterness. Maybe she wasn't gone. Just buried. But I knew better than to lead a company on hope. Just after 10 p.m., I finally packed up to head home. My inbox was mostly quiet, except for one notification on our internal leadership Slack thread, a voice memo from Valora. At first I thought it was addressed to me privately. I clicked, but when I opened it, I froze. It had been sent to the entire executive leadership channel. Her voice crackled through the speakers, tight, frustrated, exhausted. "I know what I did," she began, her breath ragged. "I doctored the numbers. I spun fantasy projections. I made her bleed for years just so I'd feel clean, and I told myself she deserved it because she wasn't supposed to win." My body went still. Silence. Then the thread erupted, dozens of blinking status lights changing from green to red to offline, one by one. Co-workers stunned, board members replying, "We need legal in on this." HR tagging compliance, a flood of concern, shock, some relief. My phone buzzed non-stop. It was too late to control the spread. The confession was out, raw, unfiltered, broadcasted to every senior leader in the company. For a moment, I just sat there, hands resting on the keyboard, not typing, not reacting, just feeling. I pulled open the top drawer of the desk. Inside was a photo tucked between two old pens. Me, maybe 5 or 6. Valora behind me, carefully parting my hair into 2 braids. I was grinning, missing a front tooth. She was focused, protective. It felt like another lifetime. HR emailed me a formal letter. All I had to do was sign. They'd handle the rest. Clear policy violation, termination justified, action required within 12 hours. I stared at that document for nearly 20 minutes, not because I didn't know what needed to be done, but because I wished, deep down, that she had sent the message to me first. I wished she had trusted me with the truth before it exploded. I picked up the stylus, pressed it to the tablet screen, and signed. Then I turned back to my screen. The HR system was still open. Employee, Runry 24, Valora Ainsley, my sister. I moved the cursor to the sendee button, and I clicked. The screen refreshed. The system logged the entry. Employee, Bomber 324 terminated. The moment I hit send, the screen blinked once, then gave me the finality I thought I wanted. Employee, Bomber 324 terminated. But instead of relief, something unfamiliar sat heavy in my chest. Not quite guilt, not pride either, just silence. And in that silence I realized this wasn't a win, it was a fracture. I stayed in my office long after the sun went down. The city lights painted flickers on the window, but I couldn't move. My phone buzzed twice, both from the PR team. I didn't answer. At 6:32 the next morning, I walked into the kitchen and poured a stale cup of coffee. My phone lit up with a dozen missed calls and even more messages. One from Jenna, our head of media. "Lunith. It's out." The voice memo. "CNN just aired it. Call me now." And before I could respond, my inbox exploded. Subject lines screamed at me, "Sister versus sister, coffee, CEO, and corporate chaos leaked memo, reveals internal sabotage bloodlines and bottom lines, Valora's downfall." I opened the clip, expecting to feel numb, but hearing her voice, raw, shaking, defiant, cut deeper than I expected. "I made her bleed for years so I'd feel clean. I needed to. Otherwise I'd just be the shadow, the other daughter, the one Dad didn't pick, the one who wasn't enough." My stomach clenched. Within an hour, TikTok had hundreds of stitched reactions. One woman cried, another said, "This hits too close to home. Families do this." Someone else quoted it like scripture. "I made her bleed so I'd feel clean." It was spreading like a virus, except this time our company's name was the host. By 9, board members were calling. The chair, Mr. Halverson, didn't even bother with a greeting. "We need to contain this. Fast. Legal wants a statement by noon. And Lunith? I'm sorry, but this isn't going away." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I already knew. But the part that gutted me came mid-morning. My personal phone buzzed. "Mom, mobile." I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe. Her voice came in hot and shaking. "You couldn't let it go, could you?" "Mom, she was your sister, Lunith. Your sister. You humiliated her in front of the world." I leaned against the countertop. "She did that to herself. She's not perfect. None of us are. But this is cruelty." I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You're right. She's not perfect. And neither am I. But I didn't press charges. I signed a termination notice. That's it." Her voice dropped. Icy and final. We take care of our own, or we used to. Click. She hung up. The silence that followed felt worse than any shouting. That afternoon in the boardroom, a new storm rolled in. Jenna slid me her phone wordlessly. "You need to see this." It was an anonymous email, forwarded to the board. Subject line, discrepancies, Valora Caldwell's financials, flagged. The attachment was damning. Inflated payments to consultants who didn't exist. Over $200,000 rerouted over 14 months, all tied to Valora's department. And one name kept repeating, Devin L., her old college boyfriend turned brand advisor. I stared at the numbers, my pulse thudding in my ears. The room fell silent until Halverson spoke. "We push legal. This is theft." HR's face went pale. "We need to reopen the investigation immediately." I sat motionless, except for my hands clasped tight in my lap. Do what you have to. But inside, my chest ached like a pressure cooker. Not just from the betrayal, from the weight of knowing I still didn't want to destroy her, only stop her. The next day, just before dusk, I left the building through the lower garage. The lights flickered, and there she was, Valora. Her hair was wild, eyeliner smudged down her cheeks. She stood near the pillar, arms crossed, eyes bloodshot. "So this is what you wanted." I stopped a few feet away. "You got what you wanted. Now finish me off. File the charges. Ruin me like I ruined you." I shook my head. "I wanted a sister, Valora, not this." She stepped closer. "You think you're so noble, huh? Sitting on your little CEO throne while I'm out here with nothing. You made those choices. And you made yours. Don't pretend this was justice. You wanted to win." I didn't answer. We stood there for what felt like an eternity. Then she reached into her purse, hands trembling, and pulled out something folded, creased, soft, nearly falling apart at the edges. A letter. Valora stared at me. "You remember this?" I did. It was the envelope I'd left under her pillow in 10th grade, when I'd transferred to a new school after Dad's stroke. I wrote it with shaking hands and too much hope, thinking a few words could keep us close. "You'll always have me, no matter what." She held it like it was a weapon and a wound all at once. Then she whispered, "Do I still?" Valora stared at me. Then slowly, like someone disarming a bomb, she reached into her purse and pulled out something crumpled, yellowed and soft at the edges. Her fingers hesitated, shaking as she extended it toward me. I didn't move at first. I just looked at it, at her. Her eyes, red and damp, were locked onto mine like this was some kind of offering, or maybe a confession. She didn't speak, and she didn't need to, because the moment I took it, I knew. It was the envelope I left under her pillow when we were still kids, still sisters in a world we thought we could shape with pinky promises and flashlight secrets. My handwriting, rounded and naive, still bled slightly into the cheap-lined paper. I unfolded it carefully, as if touching it too hard might make the whole memory vanish. "If anything ever happens, let's stay together, please." No signature, just that. I'd written it the night Mom slammed the door and Dad slept in the car. I remember crawling into bed with Valora, whispering, "No matter what they do, we stick, okay?" Back then, she'd nodded, her tiny pinky looped into mine. Now she stood in front of me, mascara stained and trembling after years of betrayal, lies, and bitterness, and I didn't know whether to cry or just let the wind carry it all away. "I kept it," she said finally, voice low and raw. "All these years. It was under my dresser. Until I moved out. Then it stayed in my wallet. I couldn't throw it away." I looked at her, unsure what to say. My chest was tight. Not from grief. Grief had long since been processed, but from something more complicated. She glanced at the ground. "I hated you for writing it." That caught me off guard. "You what?" "I hated that you believed in us, that you thought we were something worth saving. They always said I had to be better than you, always." I stared. Valora kept talking like the words had been caged for years. Dad used to say, "She's the soft one, you're the sharp edge." And Mom, she told me straight up, "You're the future. Luneth is a phase we don't talk about." She laughed, but it was brittle. They made you the lesson and me the standard. I took a breath, but the air in the garage felt stale, heavy. "You let them weaponize you," I said, quieter than I expected. She nodded. "I know. And you went along with it, every chance you got." "I was the enforcer," she said. "I thought if I shamed you enough, they'd love me more." A long silence fell between us. Just the hum of distant traffic and the wind rattling against the parking structure beams. "I thought you were just cruel," I whispered. "Turns out you were broken too." She didn't deny it, just stood there with that same teenage sadness in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. I looked at the letter again. Something inside me cracked. Not open, but clean. A fracture that didn't hurt, just realigned. I folded the letter back up and tucked it into my coat pocket. Then I walked past her. "Luneth," she called behind me, voice unsteady. "Please, I don't have anyone left." I stopped at the stairwell door. Without turning, I said, "You did. You had me. But you chose them." She didn't follow, and I didn't expect her to. I drove home in silence. The streets were still wet from earlier rain, the reflections of streetlights blurring into long streaks on the asphalt. My phone buzzed a few times, group chats lighting up with articles, videos, the same headline looping everywhere. Sister versus sister, coffee, CEO, and corporate chaos. I muted them all. When I reached my condo, I parked underground and took the elevator up, barely aware of my own hands pressing buttons. Inside, I took off my coat, hung it neatly, and laid the old envelope on the kitchen counter. I poured myself a glass of water and just stood there, not angry, not broken, just aware. I thought about how much I had carried all these years, shame that wasn't mine, expectations that never belonged to me, silence I wore like armor. And now, with everything out in the open, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. I showered, changed into pajamas, and sat on the couch with the lamp dimmed low. I didn't cry. I didn't spiral. I just breathed. That was enough. Until the buzzer rang. I looked at the wall-mounted intercom screen. The time read 10:46 p.m. Valora. Her hair was a mess, coat clutched tightly, and eyes wide like a child left at a locked door. She was crying. Security wouldn't let her in. She wasn't on the list. She looked directly into the camera, as if somehow she could see me behind the screen. "Luneth," she mouthed. "Please." I reached for the mic. My thumb hovered over the button, and then I didn't press it. I muted the screen, watched her image pixelate for a second, then disappear. I sat back. Let the silence fill the room. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. I woke up to the soft gray light pressing through the blinds. For the first time in years, I hadn't startled awake in the middle of the night, no clenched jaw, no hollow ache behind my eyes. Just stillness. My feet touched the cold floor, and I sat there for a moment, not rushing anything. Something inside had shifted, not healed, but steadier. I'd barely started my coffee when my phone buzzed. "The board wants to see you. Urgent. Can you come in now?" The message read, no explanation, no subject line, just that. I drove in silence. The roads were damp, early sunlight glinting off the asphalt. I kept the windows cracked just enough to feel the air. It smelled like change, like the kind you don't chase but meet halfway. When I stepped into the conference room, most of the board members were already seated. The room was quieter than usual. No idle chatter, no fake smiles, just a long, heavy pause as I took my seat. The chair of the board, Mr. Dunning, cleared his throat. "Luneth, thank you for coming on short notice. We wanted you to hear this directly." He glanced at the others. One by one, they nodded. "We've conducted a formal review regarding recent incidents, both financial and personal, surrounding Valora James. After thorough discussion," he didn't sugarcoat it, "her executive role has been unanimously revoked." Effective immediately. No drawn-out justification. No performance review drama. Just a clean, final line drawn. Another board member, a woman I barely knew outside of quarterly meetings, leaned forward. "Nepotism ends today," she said, as if she'd been waiting years to say it out loud. They looked to me then. I was offered the option to issue a formal statement to the press, clarify my role, rewrite the narrative if I wished. I shook my head. "No statement," I said simply. They waited, expecting more. I gave them nothing else. I left the room before the echo of the gavel faded. Downstairs, the air in the lobby was suddenly colder, like a storm brewing in a sealed building. And then I heard it, Valora's voice, sharp and shaking. "I want to speak to someone right now," she snapped at the front desk. "This is my building. Where's my assistant?" The receptionist, a young man in a crisp vest and tie, held his posture. "Ma'am, you'll need to speak with the CEO," he said gently. Valora scoffed, rolled her eyes, and turned. That's when she saw me. Through the glass wall of the corner office, I was seated at the desk, papers in hand, phone tucked between shoulder and cheek, not flinching. Our eyes met. She stood frozen. No one clapped, no one gasped, but the silence was louder than any cheer. And this time, I didn't look away. I stayed behind the glass a few more minutes, long enough to see her walk off, heels clicking with less certainty than usual. Later that afternoon, I took the long route through the building. Past departments I hadn't walked through in years, faces turned, conversations paused. Some employees stood, not out of fear, but something closer to respect, maybe regret. No one said anything, and I didn't ask them to. I didn't need revenge, just recognition. When I got home that evening, the condo was quiet, not hollow, just calm. I put my bag down, walked to the hall closet, and opened the storage bin that had sat untouched for nearly a decade. At the bottom, wrapped in yellowed tissue, was an old photo frame. It was us, me and Valora, maybe 10 and 12, grinning with snow in our hair, cheeks red, bundled up in coats too big for our bodies. I stared at it for a long time. Then I walked to my bedroom, opened the drawer of my nightstand, and slid the photo inside. No ceremony, no bitterness, just a decision. "I still wish it could have been different," I whispered. But I didn't cry. I didn't text her. I didn't open the door she'd stood behind just the night before. I just sat down, pulled the blanket over my lap, and let the room fill with its own quiet. Not empty, not broken, just quiet. Do you think I was too cold for walking away without a single word? Or was that the only kind of peace left to choose? When family breaks you in public and leaves you to bleed alone, not every battle is loud. Some are just silent lines you no longer cross. But maybe that's what healing looks like.